At around 4 p.m. on Friday, April 15, 2011, in Lorgues, France, 27-year-old Xavier Dupont was on his way home when he received a call from his younger sister, Séverine. She was a high school student, and the siblings had a close relationship, often calling each other. However, today she called not to share good news or weekend plans. Instead, she informed him that their mother, Colette, had not picked her up after school as she usually did. The day before, Séverine had been with their father, who had taken her to school in the morning. She had tried calling their mother multiple times, but her calls went unanswered. This was unusual because their mother was normally very responsible, and there was no reason for her not to come and pick up her daughter. Séverine was worried that something might have happened, such as an accident. She advised Alexander to check the situation and visit their mother's house. Alexander was also worried, so he called his mother several times, but received no response. Finally, he decided to visit his mother's house himself. When Alexander arrived, Séverine was already there, but she was still very anxious, even more than before. She was in the house with the gendarmes, and what they discovered was very concerning. Colette's car was parked in the driveway, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. 52-year-old Colette had vanished without a trace. The keys to the house were also in the car, so Alexander took them and went inside to see what was happening. The house was completely empty, as if she had simply disappeared. The gendarmes quickly began their search for Colette since the situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Initially, they suspected a robbery, but they found that nothing was stolen from the house. The doors and windows were untouched. In the back seat of the car, they discovered Colette's purse, which held all her identification, bank cards, and cash. She could not have left willingly without those items. Tension heightened. Even after 3 hours of searching, there was still no news. Both the house and the car were thoroughly examined, but no leads emerged. As a result, the search area was expanded to include the outskirts of the town. None of the neighbors had seen anything out of the ordinary, no suspicious noises or activity near Colette's home. To learn more about her, the police interviewed her relatives. Colette, a divorced mother of 4, was known for her reserved and calm demeanor. She was not someone who would spontaneously disappear. She had no mental health issues or addictions. At the time, Colette was working as a supermarket manager. She was polite, punctual, and a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her was confused and did not understand what had happened, as she had no troubling relationships and no history of violence. The evidence suggested that Colette's disappearance was not accidental. The police believed that whoever was involved in this incident was someone she was very familiar with. At the very least, Colette had allowed this person into her house or had given them the right to enter. After investigating, the police identified the primary suspect. She lived by herself in a small 2-story house. To save on expenses, she rented the first floor to a man named Bernard. During his interview, Bernard made some strange and unsettling remarks. He speculated on how Colette might have been abducted, suggesting that she could have been struck on the back of the head, rendering her unable to call for help. He also provided a detailed account of her medical condition, noting that she was diabetic and needed urgent assistance to avoid serious health consequences. His level of knowledge about Colette raised suspicions among the police. Furthermore, Colette's son, Alexander, revealed that Bernard was in love with his mother, which could explain his insight into her behavior and routines. This revelation increased suspicions, as Bernard could potentially have a motive. Alexander noted that, despite Bernard's interest, his mother did not reciprocate and had no intention of developing anything beyond friendship. She was solely focused on her children and her work, completely dismissing the idea of a romantic relationship with Bernard. When detectives investigated Bernard's background, they found that he had a criminal history. In 1999, he assaulted his girlfriend with a weapon after she tried to end their relationship. His ex described him as very hot-tempered and unable to control his rage. As a result of these incidents, suspicions about Bernard increased. Colette's lack of interest may have caused him to become angry, and what happened next remains unclear. In 1999, Bernard received a brief 6-year prison sentence for an attack, mainly because the girl he attacked survived. Now, he was called to the police station for questioning as the primary suspect in Colette's disappearance. The police were trying to determine when Colette went missing, and Bernard claimed to have useful information. He reported that on the afternoon of April 14, 2011, while watching television, he heard noises coming from the second floor, where Colette had lived. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, but then everything went quiet. He did not see Colette leave, making it likely that he was the last person to have seen her. However, the police were concerned about Bernard's behavior. He was unable to recall the exact time of the noises or even remember what show he was watching, raising further suspicions. Bernard's main problem was that he didn't have a verifiable alibi. However, there was no evidence against him, so the police had to let him go. The next morning, officers came to inspect his house. Bernard greeted them with shouts and was initially unwilling to let them enter. Eventually, he agreed to show them around the first floor of the rented property but continued to make odd comments. Notably, he pointed out a hatch that led to the basement. He remarked that if he had killed someone, he would have hidden the body there, yet he insisted he was innocent and claimed the basement was empty. Upon inspection, there was indeed no one there. Meanwhile, when law enforcement searched Colette's home, they discovered suspicious stains believed to be washed blood, but this could not be confirmed. Despite the lack of evidence, suspicion remained around Bernard. Deciding to keep a close watch on him, the detectives sought to establish the exact time of Colette's disappearance, but clues were scarce. She had been alone for several days with minimal contact with her neighbor until April 15th. Anything could have happened during that time. Investigators began to piece together her movements, partly based on Bernard's statement that he had heard loud noises from the floor above on April 14th, the day before she vanished. As the investigators looked into the case, they realized that no one had seen Colette since April 15th. They managed to locate her friend, who stated that he had last seen Colette on April 14th around 3:30 p.m. at a gathering with mutual friends. He mentioned that after leaving the party, she got into her car intending to drive to Draguignan but planned to stop at home first. This was the only information available and was considered a starting point for the investigation, as more than 40 hours had passed since she went missing. Communicating with Colette's friend helped them determine a rough timeline for when she went missing. In her car, investigators found not only her personal belongings but also her mobile phone. They began analyzing the phone to see whom Colette had communicated with in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Notably, there was a call that lasted about 40 seconds, made shortly before 3:30 p.m. The call was from Sylviane Fabre, Colette's ex-husband's sister. Sylviane was contacted, and she stated that she had met Colette during Colette's marriage to her brother. At that time, Colette's relationship with her husband was not very good, so they decided to separate. However, afterward, the former spouses and their families managed to maintain friendly relations. Sylviane mentioned that back in 2008, they collaborated with Colette to invest money in a joint business. Shortly before Colette's disappearance, the business partners had a small conflict regarding these assets, but Sylviane claimed that everything was resolved, and they continued to work together. Together, Sylviane and Colette created a real estate company that generated a substantial income, which provided Sylviane with a potential motive. Not only were they distant relatives, but they also had shared finances and property, which can often lead to such conflicts. Naturally, Sylviane denied any wrongdoing. Colette's daughter mentioned that Sylviane often had conflicts regarding their joint activities. They could argue and reconcile several times a day. However, Colette's daughter described all these disputes as minor issues that were resolved quickly. The gendarmes checked Sylviane's schedule for the last few days. She had an alibi confirmed by her son. For almost the entire duration of the investigation, suspicions against Sylviane were not substantiated, and the search operation again hit a dead end. On April 17, 2011, the prosecutor's office began a judicial investigation into the disappearance of Colette. With no leads left and all suspicious individuals cleared as unlikely suspects, there was no option but to notify the media and hope, with their assistance, to obtain new witnesses who might have noticed something. At a recent press conference, officials announced that while there were priority leads in the criminal investigation, no suspects had been identified. This news sparked significant interest among journalists, as the case could potentially involve themes of business, money, love, or betrayal. Consequently, rumors began circulating about Colette immediately, some of which were quite alarming. Her information, background, and photos quickly became prominent in newspapers and on television. Her children expressed their desire to see her again and shared how difficult her absence was for them. The most concerning aspect was that the critical 48-hour window for finding her alive had already passed, significantly diminishing the chances of a successful rescue. While the prosecutor's office hoped to gather new leads from the public through the media, the police were actively searching the nearby villages. Following the press conference, the search area was widened, and a special investigative unit took over the case. Colette's disappearance began to attract national attention. The media frenzy intensified as they attempted to connect her case with another notorious crime that had recently shaken France. A few days before Colette went missing in early April 2011, 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family, including the wife and 4 children, were found murdered under the terrace of their home in Nantes. The head of the family, Xavier, disappeared shortly after the murders, having been spotted on the outskirts of the city on April 15. Authorities believe Xavier was responsible for the crime, and he was placed on a nationwide wanted list. Notably, the location of the massacre was only 30 kilometers from Colette's home. The media quickly linked these incidents together. The timing coincided with Colette's likely disappearance, raising the possibility that Xavier kidnapped her. An even stranger coincidence was that the Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in a house that Colette had sold in 1992. Xavier was viewed as a respectable citizen, a devoted husband, and a caring father who was engaged in his community and known for his honesty and fairness. However, it later emerged that Xavier was deep in debt at the time he murdered his family. Just days before the killings, he purchased cement, tools, and 4 bags of lime, suggesting he had a motive and was preparing for the crime. Journalists speculated that Xavier may have had a grudge against Colette, but the reason for his potential revenge remained unclear. Rumors spread quickly, with theories ranging from a fraudulent real estate deal to unrequited love. Others suspected it could be part of a planned escape. Xavier could have taken Colette so they could be together again. Witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen Xavier's car near her home. Some even reported seeing him stop in town on April 14. Although these accounts seemed unlikely, detectives noticed clear connections between Xavier and Colette. This led them to investigate the possibility that the two had escaped together. Consequently, Colette shifted from being seen as a victim to potentially being viewed as an accomplice in crimes that might have involved Xavier's family. However, friends and family of Colette quickly disputed this theory, asserting that she was not capable of cruelty. As detectives explored new leads that emerged almost daily, they became convinced that there was no romantic or conspiratorial link between Xavier and Colette. They began to feel that the similarities between Xavier and Colette were merely coincidental or tragic coincidences. To definitively eliminate this theory, they decided to examine both Xavier's and Colette's mobile phones. They encountered a challenge. Xavier's phone could not be tracked, and there were no calls or messages from Colette's phone to his. After their investigation, they found no evidence of any contact between the two after the sale of the house. Although the theory regarding Xavier was intriguing, it ultimately consumed valuable police time and resources. 3 weeks after Colette's disappearance, any possible link to Xavier was dismissed. Xavier himself was never found, leaving the French police at an impasse. The case has reached a dead end and will not make any progress until at least May 15, 2011. On this day, about 30 kilometers from Lorgues, 2 tourists were returning from a forest hike and taking photos. While using a remote path to capture some scenic shots, they were hit by a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the side of the path. One of the tourists decided to investigate the source of the odor. As the woman approached a pile of stones, the smell intensified and became unbearable. When she moved one of the stones, she discovered a leg protruding from beneath the rocks. The tourists quickly called the police. Within minutes, gendarmes arrived at the location and found the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, making it difficult to determine her gender. Only her clothing provided a clue. The police attempted to identify the victim but were initially unsuccessful. They took photographs of her clothes, accessories, and jewelry, which were then shown to the families of various women who had gone missing in the area. Among those families were the children of Colette. Her daughter and son recognized their mother based on what she was wearing. Although the gendarmes believed they had identified Colette a month after her disappearance, they chose to wait for more conclusive evidence. DNA analysis was necessary to confirm family ties, as appearance alone could not provide definitive proof. Ultimately, the examination verified the police's suspicions. The body was indeed identified as Colette Deromme. On May 17, 2011, an autopsy was conducted on the body that had been found at the Forensic Medical Institute. Unfortunately, the condition of the remains was so poor that the exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic expert did confirm that Colette had not been abused before her death, but it did not help the police make much progress in the case. As a result, the investigation into her disappearance shifted focus to a murder investigation. On June 9, 2011, Colette's body was buried. Law enforcement officers attended the funeral, knowing that criminals sometimes show up at such events to witness the impact of their actions. Some may seek to relive their emotions, while others might derive satisfaction from seeing the grief of the victim's family. Several officers remained in vehicles, while others blended in with the attendees, discreetly observing the proceedings. During this time, the police noted that Sylvian, Colette's business partner and sister-in-law, was missing from the funeral. Although Sylvian and Colette were close, Sylvian's absence raised suspicions. This concern increased a few days later when Sylvian attempted to end her life. Although she survived with minor injuries and poisoning, her actions were alarming. When the police arrived after a call from Sylvian's neighbor, they found Sylvian lying on her couch at home. She was unable to fully express herself, so she was taken to a medical center for assistance. However, the officers did not leave empty-handed. They discovered a lengthy letter addressed to her son, David Perel, which was several pages long. While the letter did not contain explicit confessions regarding her actions concerning Colette, the detectives interpreted it as a potential admission of guilt prior to her death. The police decided to speak with David, and he provided new insights into the troubled relationship between Sylvian and Colette. He believed that shortly before Colette's death, she and Sylvian had experienced a serious conflict related to their shared business. Intrigued, the detectives asked David to recount his activities on April 14th. He described the daytime as uneventful, but his account of the evening was much more compelling. On April 14th, at around 10 p.m., Sylvian asked David to drive her to Colette's house to discuss some important business matters. Her own car was broken, so she turned to him for help. However, on their way, his car also broke down a few kilometers from home. Despite the rain, they decided to walk back instead. He took the car battery with them, and together they returned in an attempt to fix the car. On the night Colette disappeared, this mother and son spent hours in the rain attempting to repair a car left outside the city. The gendarmes suspected that David was trying to create a questionable alibi to explain his absence from home. This suspicion was further fueled by Sylvian's initial statement to the detectives, in which she claimed she had spent the previous days at home. It seemed implausible that she could forget such a significant event. When Sylvian regained consciousness in the medical center, her account of the events changed. Her new story mirrored what her son had previously told, including all the important details. The gendarmes decided to investigate her claims. They found that on the night of April 14th to 15th, there was no rain in the area. Additionally, it was odd that Sylvian and her son were unable to flag down a passing car for a ride home. Why did they walk so far while carrying a battery with them? The road's vehicle monitoring system revealed that approximately 5 cars passed by during the time they were walking home. It seemed unlikely that none of these drivers would have stopped to assist them in the rain. This raised suspicions that David and Sylvian were hiding something and might be involved in the death of Colette. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence to support these suspicions. As a result, the decision was made to keep a close watch on them over the next few months. Their phone calls were monitored, and on February 8, 2012, this surveillance yielded important information. The police intercepted a conversation between Sylvian and Bernard, who was Colette's neighbor. It became clear that Bernard knew much more than he had initially revealed. On April 14, he not only heard sounds coming from above but also saw Sylvian's car arrive at the house, indicating he was aware of her actions. David, Sylvian's son, was also involved, as he was driving for his mother. On February 20, 2012, David and Sylvian were arrested. Detectives viewed David as the weak link. During questioning, he quickly confessed, seeming relieved to unburden himself of his guilt. He revealed that on April 14, they arrived at Colette's home around 3:30 p.m. Afterward, Sylvian lured her into a barn behind the house. A business dispute led to further conflict, during which Sylvian attacked Colette, beating her to the ground. Then, she took a rope from the barn and began to strangle Colette in front of David. Although he did not intervene or participate in the attack, he admitted to helping move the body afterward. They left Colette's body on the property, covering it with a tarpaulin. In the evening, when they fabricated the story about the broken car, they took the body out of town. David assisted Sylvian in dragging the deceased away from the road and covering her with stones. Despite David's confession, Sylvian denied any wrongdoing. She claimed the death was accidental and that they hid the body out of fear of the police. However, it was puzzling how well prepared she seemed for the crime, as she had latex gloves that prevented her from leaving fingerprints. After being detained for 48 hours, Sylvian was charged with murder, while David was released. Though he was viewed as an accomplice, his testimony needed verification, so he remained under judicial supervision. The next step was to determine the motive. It turned out that the motive was linked to financial issues. Sylvian's business was on the brink of failure when Colette uncovered that Sylvian was embezzling money from clients. Another possible motive was jealousy, as Colette was thriving while Sylvian's problems continued to grow. Shortly before the tragedy, Sylvian had gone through a painful divorce, and one of her 2 sons had been convicted of violence. Communication between her and David had nearly ceased, and his involvement in the crime marked the end of their close relationship. On January 21, 2014, David was charged in court with the murder of Colette. He claimed that he was only an accomplice and that he helped hide the body due to pressure from his mother. Sylvian, his mother, argued that the incident was an act of involuntary manslaughter. She explained that she had lost her temper after a conflict with her business partner, Colette, who was trying to take everything from her. Facing life in prison, Sylvian sought to downplay her guilt. The prosecutor's office looked into the role of the tenant, Bernard. Although he witnessed the conflict between Sylvian and Colette, he did not report it because he feared Sylvian. Ultimately, he testified as a witness for the prosecution. On January 23, 2014, the jury found Sylvian Fabre guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 30 years in prison. Bernard was acquitted, and David Perel received a 3-year suspended sentence. Over the years, Colette's children struggled to understand what had happened in that barn with their mother. Despite the complicated trial, they felt uncertain that the entire truth had been uncovered. They were unhappy with the court's verdict, believing that Sylvian had committed premeditated murder but had received a lenient sentence. Additionally, they felt Bernard was more involved than he had admitted and had evaded responsibility for the crime. The case of Colette Deromme is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many unanswered questions for her family and the community. Colette, a devoted mother, suddenly disappeared, leading to a lengthy investigation filled with suspicions of love, money, and betrayal. Ultimately, the truth was revealed through David's confession and Sylvian's sentencing, but was justice truly served? Bernard, the neighbor with a murky past, remains a significant question mark as he evades all charges. For Colette's children, the pain lies not only in losing their mother but also in the feeling that the secrets surrounding their mother's death may be buried forever.